Today, we're uncovering the tragedies of a young woman from Goa who left everything behind for a promised life in America. She met him at a beauty salon, an American tourist with charm, money, and a plan. What began as long-distance romance quickly turned into a visa, a flight, and a future built on trust. But just weeks after arriving in Michigan, her messages stopped. Her family grew anxious. And what followed would expose a dark reality behind the picture-perfect promise. Anjali D'Souza was 27 years old and worked as a beautician in a modest but busy salon located along a tourist strip in North Goa. She lived in Mapusa with her parents in a small two-bedroom flat they had rented for nearly a decade. Her father, retired railway clerk, and her mother, a part-time seamstress, depended in part on her income. Anjali had a reputation for professionalism. She was punctual, quiet at work, and popular among regular clients for her precise hand and respectful demeanor. The salon saw its highest footfall during the tourist season between November and March. Foreigners booked back-to-back appointments, and Anjali, who spoke fluent English, often handled the more demanding clients. That was how she came across Michael Reeves, a 34-year-old American man who introduced himself as an IT consultant on vacation from Michigan. He arrived for a haircut and massage one afternoon in early January. What caught attention wasn't just his appearance, tall, fair-skinned, and well-groomed, but the way he spoke to staff, tipping generously and engaging in small talk that bordered on flirtatious. Michael returned twice more that same week, booking appointments under Anjali's name. The salon staff noticed it, but said nothing. Goa had seen many such holiday encounters. By the third visit, he had asked for her Instagram handle. From there, the conversation shifted to WhatsApp. Their early messages were casual, questions about Indian food, the best beaches, cultural tips. But grew more frequent, stretching into late nights. He began sending short videos, photos from his travels, and voice notes. The tone shifted from friendly to personal within weeks. What stood out was his consistency. Unlike most tourists who disappeared after the trip, Michael kept in touch. He sent her birthday flowers through an online delivery service, followed by a book she had once mentioned during a call. Anjali's co-workers began to notice she smiled more often, looked at her phone between appointments, and sometimes stayed late to catch his video calls after her shift. Yet she kept the details private, not one to openly discuss her personal life. In Goa, relationships between local women and foreign tourists weren't unheard of, but they rarely progressed beyond the season. Many locals viewed such pairings with caution. Anjali was aware of the risks. Her background was middle-class and conservative, and she knew any serious commitment to a foreigner would raise concerns at home. Still, she didn't rush. She listened. She observed. She asked him about his job, his family, his past relationships. What she heard sounded stable. He worked remotely, owned a home, and had never been married. Michael, for his part, appeared careful not to push. He was never explicit, never demanding. Instead, he positioned himself as someone who admired her independence, her dedication to work, and her grace, as he called it in one of his messages. Over time, he began to suggest visiting again. Not just for another vacation, he said, but to meet her properly, in daylight, in real clothes, with her family nearby. Anjali hesitated but didn't refuse. She consulted a few close friends but didn't tell her parents. The cultural weight of bringing a foreign man home was significant, and she wasn't ready for that confrontation yet. Still, she looked forward to his visit, marked the tentative date on her calendar, and began researching more about the United States, not because she had plans, but because she wanted to understand the world he came from. The contact remained steady for months. Her life continued in its rhythm, salon work, evening chores, but now it was punctuated by digital affection from thousands of miles away. Most people around her saw little change. But those who paid close attention noticed that Anjali had begun to hope. Not for escape, not even for marriage, but for the possibility of something better than what she had always expected life to give her. Before we dive deeper, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you. And don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. What began in the casual heat of a coastal afternoon had grown into something that, at least to her, felt real. Michael Reeves was still a stranger in a way, but in a world filled with uncertain paths, he had started to look like a road she might choose. Whether that road would lead to something good, something else entirely, no one could have predicted. Not then. Not yet. Over the course of 6 months, the interaction between Anjali D'Souza and Michael Reeves transitioned from intermittent digital communication to something more sustained. The American man who had once been a former client at her Goa salon now became a daily presence in her life, albeit virtually. Their exchanges expanded beyond casual talk. He spoke of routines, future plans, and career goals. She responded with updates on her work schedule, her family, and local life. Video calls became routine. Parcels and letters began to arrive regularly.
They told you these stories didn't exist. We're here to prove they do. Real footage, real crimes. No filter. For more true crime from the South, be sure to like and subscribe to our channel at Southern Sin. You can also support more episodes by becoming a member of the Southern Sin channel, where you'll get early, exclusive access to crimes that mainstream media won't show you. Tune in for all new episodes every True Crime Tuesday at 9 p.m.
In due time, Michael arranged a second visit to India. This time, he stayed for 3 weeks and rented a serviced apartment in Panaji. His return was seen by some of Anjali's co-workers as serious commitment, though many still viewed the situation with quiet suspicion. Foreign men returning for Indian women were not unheard of in Goa, but the outcomes were mixed. Anjali's decision to let him meet her family marked a significant shift. It was not common in her household to entertain visitors with clear intentions, especially from overseas. Her father, formerly employed with Indian Railways, held conservative views. He found the idea of his daughter settling abroad disquieting, especially under the protection of someone they barely knew. Michael's manner, however, was carefully calibrated. He avoided displays of affection, dressed modestly, and answered questions respectfully. He brought small gifts, praised Indian customs, and expressed admiration for Anjali's upbringing. He emphasized his desire to marry and provide a home in the U.S., claiming that he could support her financially while she adjusted to a new life. Despite private misgivings, the family did not immediately object. They had little leverage in the matter, especially as Anjali was of legal age and appeared committed to her choice. Her mother remained quiet but attentive. Her father voiced doubts but stopped short of issuing ultimatums. Within the second week of his stay, Michael presented Anjali with a full proposal, not a public spectacle, but a private act, witnessed by her family in the modest living room of their flat. After Michael's departure, preparation began for the K-1 fiancé visa. The application process was handled through proper immigration channels. Michael submitted documentation of his employment, financial records, and prior travel history. Anjali collected the required paperwork, identification, medical examination results, and relationship evidence including photographs and message logs. The case underwent routine background verification. The U.S. consulate in Mumbai scheduled her for a mandatory interview. Anjali answered questions regarding the duration of their relationship, the nature of their communication, and her understanding of the marriage expectations under the K-1 program. The officer reviewed her file, verified the authenticity of documents, and completed biometric procedures. The visa was granted without incident. She was issued a single-entry permit valid for 90 days upon arrival in the United States, during which she would be legally required to marry the petitioner or return home. Before her departure, Anjali resigned from the salon. She informed clients and co-workers without disclosing many details. Her father assisted in packing. Her parents accompanied her to the airport. Emotions ran high, but no scenes were made. Her belongings were limited to case and a carry-on. She boarded the flight alone. Anjali landed in Michigan on a domestic morning. She passed through immigration without issue and was collected by Michael at the airport. Her new address was registered as his suburban residence outside Grand Rapids. Her legal status upon entry was that of a temporary fiancé, not a spouse, and her right to remain in the country depended entirely on the terms of the visa, marriage occurring within the specified window. While her departure marked the beginning of a new chapter in her life, for her family, it introduced a period of anxious waiting. They received infrequent updates in the first few days, short texts confirming her arrival, a photo. Then the messages flowed. There was no legal error in the immigration process. The journey complied with both Indian and American law. Once she entered that household, her protection relied not on paperwork or policy, but on the man she had trusted. After arriving in Michigan, Anjali D'Souza entered a life that was unfamiliar in pace, environment, and expectation. The house she moved into was located in the quiet residential suburb of Grand Rapids. It was detached, modestly furnished, and isolated from any walkable town center. The surroundings were real and familiar. Anjali, who had lived her entire life in a tightly knit community in Goa, suddenly found herself without extended family, neighbors she knew, or access to familiar cultural norms. Initially, there were no signs of overt conflict. Michael Reeves maintained a surface-level routine. He worked remotely from home, kept to himself, and handled all financial matters. But subtle restrictions began to appear almost immediately. Anjali was not given a set of house keys. She was discouraged from stepping out alone, even to the nearby grocery store. When she inquired about finding local classes or temporary work, he told her she could only pursue it after their legal marriage was completed. Her communication with family grew limited. She had arrived with a personal mobile device, but within weeks, Michael insisted that it was a shared plan. He monitored her usage, discouraged long calls to India, and often stayed in the room during video chats. What began as controlling behavior escalated into full supervision. She was expected to inform him before initiating any contact, and he dictated when and how often she could use the internet. Neighbors described the couple as quiet. They rarely saw Anjali alone. On the few occasions she was outside, retrieving mail, standing by the porch, she appeared withdrawn. One neighbor later recalled a short exchange in which Anjali, while walking past, mentioned that her fiancé got angry quickly. There were no calls to law enforcement and no visible signs of injury, but several residents were overhearing loud arguments from inside the house on multiple evenings. Anjali's world narrowed to the walls of that house. There were no visits to local community centers, places of worship, or Indian stores. She wasn't enrolled in any premarital orientation or cultural education program, and no support networks were activated. As a K-1 visa holder, she had legal permission to remain in the United States for 90 days before marriage. Until that deadline, she was neither a spouse nor a resident. Her immigration status was tied exclusively to Michael's and to marry. As the weeks passed, Anjali's contact with her family decreased. What had once been regular video calls became irregular text messages. Her parents in Goa began to express concern, especially when she missed important festivals and family occasions without explanation. Attempts to reach her directly were unsuccessful. Michael would sometimes respond instead, assuring them that she was busy or resting. On the 74th day after her arrival in the United States, Anjali vanished. The date fell just under 2 weeks before the deadline to solemnize the marriage under the terms of her visa. Michael informed a neighbor that she had left the house after an argument. Later, when questioned by local authorities, he stated that Anjali had run away, and he had no knowledge of her whereabouts. He claimed she was emotionally unstable and may have left voluntarily to clear her mind. It was her father in Goa who first raised the alarm. After multiple unanswered messages and 2 weeks without any contact from his daughter, he contacted the Indian embassy in Washington, D.C., which advised him to file a formal missing person report with the local police in Michigan. That report, routed to proper diplomatic and law enforcement channels, triggered the initial outreach by authorities to Michael Reeves. Initial police response treated it as a possible voluntary disappearance. Michael presented himself as cooperative. He stated there had been no physical altercation, no threats, and no signs of struggle. He allowed investigators limited access to the house, but maintained she had taken some of her belongings and simply left. However, when authorities contacted her family, they confirmed they had not received any message from her, not even a brief call or forwarded email. The lack of communication raised immediate red flags. Anjali had no known contact in the U.S., no income, and no transportation of her own. Her visa status was pending marriage, and her legal presence in the country was under scrutiny. The idea that she had independently disappeared without a trace and without informing her family conflicted with her known habits and personality.
We've had 911.
Though no formal charges were filed at this stage, law enforcement opened an active missing person investigation. Michael remained in the house where she was last seen. There were no public alerts issued, and no media coverage was initiated. But within the local precinct, questions to form about the nature of control, the absence of oversight, and the fragile position of a foreign national whose life had depended entirely on trust. When Anjali D'Souza was officially reported missing, initial attention was given to Michael Reeves's account. He told officers that they had argued, that she stormed out of the house, refusing to say where she was going. He characterized her as emotional and unstable, suggesting she needed time alone. In the absence of immediate signs of violence, the theory of voluntary disappearance was not ruled out. But as the investigation progressed, inconsistencies in his story began to emerge. Detectives obtained a search warrant and entered the residence to document the interior and recover potential evidence. Several details stood out. Anjali's suitcase, the same one she had brought from Goa, remained untouched in the bedroom closet. Its contents were folded, sealed, and appeared not to have been disturbed. Her passport, which should have been with her personal items if she truly left, was found concealed in the back of a kitchen drawer, behind utensils. Her toiletries were neatly arranged in the bathroom. All pairs of shoes, including the ones she frequently wore outdoors, were accounted for. Nothing about the scene supported the idea that she had left voluntarily or in distress. There were no signs of packing, no missing items, no recent activity on her phone or bank account. Her immigration status was still pending, and she had no transportation, employment, or close contacts in the area. These facts, combined with the inconsistencies in Michael's statements, shifted the tone of the inquiry from routine to suspicious. As part of standard procedure in suspected foul play, investigators requested a cadaver dog to sweep the premises. The dog showed interest near the entrance of the garage and then gave a full alert beside a stack of storage bins. One plastic container was positioned beneath a large, dusty tarp and appeared recently wiped down, in contrast to others. The lid was sealed with tape. Officers opened it carefully. Inside, they discovered the remains of Anjali D'Souza. Her body had been wrapped in a bedsheet and further enclosed in layers of plastic. The packaging was tight, clearly designed to prevent odor and detection. The state of decomposition suggested the body had remained in that container for a significant period. There were visible bruises on both arms, along with ligature-like pressure marks on her neck. A traumatic injury to the side of her head indicated blunt force impact. These were not the injuries of someone who had collapsed or died of natural causes. The discovery of the body invalidated Michael's prior statements. He was taken into custody the same day on suspicion of second-degree murder and unlawful concealment of human remains. At the police station, he altered his account. He no longer claimed she had left. Instead, he stated there had been a physical altercation during an argument. He alleged that in a moment of anger, he pushed her, causing her to fall and strike her head. He claimed he panicked, assumed she was dead, and tried to cover it up. Investigators found the revised story implausible. The steps taken after the incident, wrapping the body, putting it in a container, concealing it beneath other objects in a secured garage, and maintaining the appearance of normalcy for days, all pointed to premeditated concealment, not panic. Additionally, he had continued to communicate with neighbors and law enforcement under the false pretense that Anjali had fled on her own. The autopsy confirmed the cause of death as manual strangulation. The pathologist determined that Anjali had still been alive when force was applied to her neck. The blunt force injury to the head was significant but not fatal. Evidence of bruising and broken capillaries indicated a struggle. No traces of alcohol or sedatives were found in her system. She had been fully conscious and aware during the final minutes of her life. The physical evidence from the garage, combined with the autopsy findings and timeline of Michael's false statements, formed the core of the homicide case. The container where she was found was removed as evidence, and the garage was sealed for forensic processing. Investigators noted that it had been cleaned selectively, only around the bin, further suggesting intent to mislead. Michael Reeves, who had once claimed to offer safety and stability, was now the central figure in a murder investigation. Prosecutors began preparing formal charges based on forensic data, witness testimony, and his own contradictory accounts. The case moved from a missing persons inquiry to a homicide prosecution. The setting of the crime, a quiet garage in suburban Michigan, became a critical scene in uncovering the truth of what had happened to Anjali. The trial of Michael Reeves took place under public scrutiny but without media spectacle. Proceedings were carried out in accordance with standard criminal procedure. Prosecutors focused on building a case based on pattern, motive, and physical evidence. They refrained from using emotional narratives and instead concentrated on documented facts. The case presented to the jury centered on control, isolation, and deliberate concealment of homicide. The prosecution introduced messages extracted from Michael's phone, including deleted conversations that had been recovered through forensic analysis. These showed patterns of possessiveness and emotional manipulation. Investigators presented records of restricted communications, timelines that contradicted his early claims, and digital data indicating the absence of outgoing messages or online activity from Anjali's accounts after her disappearance. Her mobile phone had not been used beyond the day of the incident. Witnesses from the neighborhood were called to testify. One neighbor confirmed hearing repeated arguments in the weeks before the disappearance. Another recalled a brief conversation in which Anjali described Michael's temper. Though none of the witnesses had seen physical violence, the consistency of their accounts reinforced the picture of a relationship marked by tension and isolation. Forensic specialists testified about the recovery of Anjali's body. The cadaver dog's alert, the condition of the container, and the placement of the bin were all outlined in detail. Photos from the scene were submitted into evidence. Experts explained the sequence of injuries and described the findings of the post-mortem examination. The bruises, the ligature marks, and the head wound were all discussed in relation to the theory of intentional homicide. The autopsy concluded that strangulation, not the head trauma, had caused her death. Prosecutors emphasized Anjali's status as a recent immigrant on a K-1 visa. She was financially dependent on Michael, unfamiliar with U.S. laws, and lacked a support system. They argued that her vulnerability had been exploited. She had no independent means to leave the household and was socially isolated. The prosecution maintained that these factors played a significant role in the escalation of psychological control that ultimately led to violence. The defense strategy was focused on portraying Michael as mentally unstable and emotionally overwhelmed. They acknowledged the death but claimed it occurred during an impulsive confrontation rather than as part of a calculated act. Their argument relied on framing the incident as an emotional outburst, followed by panic and concealment. Mental health evaluations were submitted, and a psychologist testified that Michael exhibited traits of anxiety and dependency, though no formal diagnosis of a psychiatric disorder was provided. Michael declined to testify. His legal team did not dispute concealment of the body but maintained that his actions were driven by fear, not malice. They attempted to draw attention to the lack of prior police involvement and absence of documented physical abuse. However, these efforts were overshadowed by the weight of the forensic evidence and contradictions in Michael's prior statements. Anjali's parents were granted permission to enter the U.S. on a humanitarian visa to attend the trial. They sat through the proceedings, listening to translated summaries of the testimonies. On the witness stand, they described their daughter's character and limited contact during the final weeks of life. Their testimony was brief but direct, and its impact was noted by courtroom observers.
And I'm not even joking you. Benson loves
They
it
told
much.
you these stories didn't exist.
I
We're
had
here to
buy a
prove they
simulator
do.
for him
Real
because He eats it so fast. So I got Benson 8 years ago now. And ever since I got him, he has been the pickiest dog I
They
have
told
ever
you
met.
these stories didn't exist.
In the
We're
beginning,
here
I went to the pet store and I bought him the best food that was on the shelf, and he wouldn't eat it. He
They
said it wasn't
told
good
you
enough.
these
And ever
stories
since
didn't
then, I have
exist.
been trying
We're
and
here to
trying
prove
and
they
trying to
do.
find him.
Real footage, real crimes. No filter. For more true crime from the South, be sure to like and subscribe to our channel at Southern Sin. You can also support more episodes by becoming a member of the Southern Sin channel, where you'll get early, exclusive access to crimes that mainstream media won't show you. Tune in for all new episodes every True Crime Tuesday at 9 p.m.
After closing arguments, the jury deliberated for several hours before returning a unanimous verdict of guilty on the charge of second-degree murder. The court determined that the killing was not premeditated but carried out with disregard for human life. Michael was sentenced to 30 years of imprisonment without the possibility of parole. No appeal was filed by his legal counsel within the allotted time frame. The sentencing concluded the legal process. Michael was transferred to a state correctional facility, where he began serving his term. The court sealed several records for privacy, and remaining personal effects were held for further instruction from Anjali's family. The trial left behind no unresolved legal questions, but it highlighted broader systemic issues: the vulnerability of foreign fiancés, the absence of routine welfare checks, and the consequences of unchecked court control behind closed doors. Following the conclusion of legal proceedings, Anjali D'Souza's remains were released to her family. In accordance with cultural and religious customs, her body was returned to India, where a private cremation was conducted. The ceremony was held in Goa, attended by close relatives and a small group of acquaintances. No media presence was allowed. Her ashes were scattered locally, and no formal memorial was erected. The family declined interviews and maintained silence in the weeks that followed. Although the case did not receive extensive coverage in traditional news outlets, details of Anjali's death circulated through social media platforms. Online forums and diaspora networks discussed the implications of her story, particularly in the context of international marriages involving significant legal and financial dependency. Commentators noted the absence of structured support for Indian women leaving the country under K-1 visas or similar arrangements. These discussions, while fragmented and largely informal, raised questions about the lack of institutional oversight and the vulnerability of women entering isolated domestic settings abroad. Several women's rights organizations in India issued statements urging authorities to reevaluate the current systems that process and prepare outbound brides. Their focus remained on pre-departure education, counseling, and legal literacy. These groups emphasized the need for clear guidelines and better communication between families and consular services. Though no legislative changes occurred in direct response to the case, the incident became part of advocacy material used in workshops and informational sessions across a few urban centers. In Goa, the salon where Anjali had worked made a small but permanent gesture. Her final staff photo was framed and placed near the reception area, without inscription. The display was not accompanied by any explanation to clients. It was a quiet reminder among those who had known her. Her former co-workers continued their routines, but many described a noticeable shift in mood during the months following her disappearance. New employees were told her story in general terms, often without mentioning the specifics. Michael Reeves's property in Grand Rapids was eventually listed for sale. The house had remained vacant during the trial and had been held under court authority pending the resolution of probate and legal forfeiture procedures. It was cleared of personal belongings, and the garage, once a site of forensic interest, was renovated before the sale. There was no public disclosure about the new ownership. The neighborhood moved on without visible commemoration or comment. The room where Anjali had stayed during her brief time in the United States was documented thoroughly during the investigation and photographed for evidentiary purposes. After the sentencing, the contents were cataloged and boxed. Some items were returned to her family, while others were retained as evidence until the closure of all legal matters.
They told you these stories didn't exist. We're here to prove they do. Real footage, real crimes. No filter. For more true crime from the South, be sure to like and subscribe to our channel at Southern Sin. You can also support more episodes by becoming a member of the Southern Sin channel, where you'll get early, exclusive access to crimes that mainstream media won't show you. Tune in for all new episodes every True Crime Tuesday at 9 p.m.